Good evening. We are about to start our community meeting for the Cannabis Retail Storefront for the Los Alamos Community Plan Area. I'm going to introduce Assistant County Executive Officer Barney Malekian, who will kick off this meeting.
Thank you, Gina, and welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to the, virtually of course, to the sixth and final of our community plan area meetings to discuss the placement of a cannabis retail storefront. I'm joined tonight by Gina DePinto, who you've heard from, Stephen Yee from the Business License Division of the County Executive Office, and Reese Elstad, also from our County Executive Office. From Planning and Development, Ms. Catherine Lair and Jeff Wilson, and our County Council representative is Johanna Hartley. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to explain what tonight is and what tonight isn't. Tonight really is, besides introducing the county staff to you and giving you an opportunity to listen to us talk, we want to explain the applicant selection process and the business licensing process in some detail so that you'll get a feel for how extensive and exhaustive it's intended to be. The permitting process, an overview of the community plan area, and an outline of next steps in terms of where this process is going to go. And at the bottom of this slide is a web link that you should particularly pay attention to, cannabis.countyofsb.org. Going forward in this process, you can go through that web link and stay up to date on everything related to the storefront selection process. I would like to also talk about what tonight is not. It is not a night where we will select a vendor, nor is it a night when we will select a site. It is not a final decision on the scoring sheets, and most importantly, it is not your only time to weigh in. You may email any one of us at any time in the weeks ahead as we go forward in this process. You can stay connected at the web link that I already pointed out to you. There is a board meeting on this topic on August the 18th, and there will undoubtedly be additional board meetings before a final selection is made. The rough timeline of how this is going to go, and as I said, tonight is the sixth of 6 of these community meetings we've done. It is, as is noted on the left-hand side of your screen, each meeting has a video that you can watch in its entirety. And we're very fortunate that we actually made it through all 6 meetings, and you had all of the same county staff people. So you should get some sense of some continuity of where each of us in each department is coming from. After these community meetings, there are a pair of score sheets, and my colleague Stephen Yee will talk about those in a little bit more detail. But one of them has to do essentially with the business license application. The other, which is more technical in nature, the other one is a neighborhood compatibility score sheet, which is based on a number of factors and which will ultimately account for 90% of the final score. And that neighborhood compatibility sheet, 30% of that score sheet is community input. And this meeting, along with emails, contacts, letters, etc., is what we mean by community input. This is, as I said, this is the last of the 6 meetings. You are represented in Los Alamos by 3rd District Supervisor Joan Hartmann. She is currently in a special board meeting that I actually had to step away from to join you tonight, and she is still in that meeting, but her staff is listening. And she has committed that she will definitely be watching this video at a later point. And so with that, again, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. And I'd like to turn it over to Stephen Yee from our Business License Division to walk through that process. Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. Malekian. Good evening, residents of Santa Barbara County. As Mr. Malekian mentioned, my name is Stephen Yee, and I'm a fiscal and policy analyst representing the county's executive office. I also serve as the coordinator of the county's cannabis business licensing function. The objectives of my presentation today are twofold. One, to provide an overview of the county's merit-based cannabis retail storefront selection process, and two, to detail the county's cannabis business license application submittal requirements and associated review process. The county's merit-based retail storefront selection process commences with an application that requires the following: an application deposit fee, all requirements as stated in the Business License Ordinance Chapter 50, except for live scans, a seller's permit, and an issued land use entitlement. A business operations proposal is required, and so is a neighborhood compatibility plan. Upon submittal of the application package, staff will perform the following initial reviews. The County Executive Office will review the application package and perform a review for overall completeness. And the Planning and Development Department will perform a review to ensure that the proposed operation location is properly zoned. If any portion of the application is incomplete or the proposed location is not properly zoned, a notice of non-acceptance will be issued to the applicant and the application will not move forward for further processing. If the application is deemed complete and properly zoned, the application moves on to the next phase of review and scoring. This second phase consists of a review of the Chapter 50 requirements. This review is conducted by the business licensing team, and the resulting scores are assigned a 25% weighting factor. The second component of this phase is a review of the business operations proposal conducted by a third-party evaluator and is assigned a 75% weighting factor. Aggregate scores of 85% or higher move on to the next phase of review and scoring. Those applicants achieving a score of less than 85% are noticed and will not move forward in the selection process. Phase 3 of the selection process consists of review, scoring, and forced ranking of applications by community plan area. This will be conducted by an internal selection committee on the following two components: the Chapter 50 requirements, weighted at 10%, and the neighborhood compatibility plan, weighted at 90%. Applicants achieving the highest score in each community plan area will be allowed the opportunity to apply for a land use entitlement and must also submit a complete cannabis business license application. Next, I'd like to detail the cannabis business license application submittal and review processes so that the public has a thorough understanding of the rigorous requirements and review process that our board has adopted. At a high level, cannabis business licensing allows for an inquiry into the fitness of the proposed entity and all individuals associated with the business, including owners, managers, supervisors, and employees. A business license is required for any person or entity who intends to engage in a commercial cannabis operation in the county. A business license must be obtained prior to commencement of business. However, an exception has been made for those legal non-conforming cultivators who are operating under the state's medicinal laws prior to January of 2016. Further, any person or entity seeking or possessing a cannabis state license must obtain the corresponding county business license. Cannabis business licenses, once issued, are valid for a term of 1 year. A final, unappealable, approved and issued land use entitlement is required prior to issuance of a business license. For any changes in ownership greater than 10%, a new business license application must be submitted. And finally, cannabis business licenses, once issued, are non-transferable. Per the Cannabis Business License Ordinance, a cannabis business licensing team has been assembled and consists of county departments and one outside agency that have been assigned review responsibilities relating to the review of submitted license applications. The departments that make up the licensing team are as follows: the Agricultural Commissioner, the County Executive Office, County Fire Department, the Carpinteria Summerlin Fire District, Environmental Health Services, which is a division of the Public Health Department, Planning and Development, the Sheriff's Office, Sustainability, which is a division of the Community Services Department, and the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office. The application content that operators are required to submit and that which our licensing team reviews is as follows. Background and contact information, which includes all applicant and agent names and contact information, the name and contact info for all business owners, managers, supervisors, employees, and persons having a 10% or more financial interest in the entity. A 24-hour contact name and phone number in case of any complaints that need addressing. Government issued ID for all owners, managers, supervisors, and employees to verify that all individuals meet the appropriate age requirements. And the entity name, address, and license numbers for all other commercial cannabis operations currently being operated or previously operated by the applicant. We also gather the following information on the operation: a full description of the proposed activities and products, the proposed hours of operations, the total number of employees, the physical address and assessor's parcel number, a property and premise diagram, and evidence of the authority to operate, which consists of either proof of ownership of the premises, or, if rented or leased, written permission from the property owner authorizing the tenant or lessee to conduct commercial cannabis activities at the site. And this authorization must be notarized. Additionally, applicants must provide the following state information: copies of the applicant's state licenses or applications, quantity and type of state licenses that will be required for the proposed operation, a state seller's permit or evidence that the applicant is applying for one, and as previously mentioned, an issued land use entitlement is also required. As for the business entity requirements, the applicant must provide the name and contact information for the business entity, the entity's legal status, and proof of registration with the California Secretary of State. Applicants are also required to submit other supporting documentation, such as a quality control plan. This plan must address procedures on how the applicant will comply with state standards for non-contamination. Additionally, applicants must also submit an inventory control plan to demonstrate the ability to track the location of all cannabis product and be able to reconcile inventories with the records in the track and trace database, which all operators must comply with. There are also requirements that must be met regarding site security plans and background checks. The site security plan elements that applicants must address are as follows: a perimeter security system, including fencing, locks, and alarms, motion activated perimeter exterior lighting, an alarm system maintained by a licensed company with central monitoring capabilities, and a video security system with 24-hour monitoring. Applicants must also identify limited access areas and the associated protocols, as well as an employee training plan. And applicants must identify professional security personnel, which is a requirement for all retail storefront licenses. Criminal background checks are required for any individual associated with a cannabis operation. All owners, managers, and supervisors are required to go through a live scan background check conducted by our sheriff's office that discloses no felony convictions. For employees, it is incumbent upon the business entity to perform background checks on all employees and to retain those results. For any individual that successfully passes the background check, the sheriff's office then provides an ID card that must be worn at all times when on site at the cannabis operation location. Again, per the business license ordinance, each department or agency of the licensing team is assigned specific review responsibilities for a given application. Generally, the licensing team reviews the license application and supporting documentation. They also visit the operation location to conduct site inspections. Once each department or agency approves of their review portion of the license review process, the county executive office may provide recommendation of license issuance to the treasurer tax collector's office. The treasurer tax collector then performs a review of the applicant's cannabis tax status, and if no delinquencies exist, they may produce and issue the license. Again, once a license is issued, it is valid for 1 year. Per the business license ordinance, a licensed operator must submit a renewal application annually. The review of a renewal license application consists of the following reviews by the licensing team: a review of odor complaints and responses to those complaints in compliance with the county's zoning ordinance, review of the renewal application and supporting documentation, and lastly, site inspections. In addition to the annual renewal requirement and the associated review process, the licensing team performs ongoing compliance checks throughout the term of the license to ensure compliance with the business licensing ordinance. The licensing team has established compliance check schedules to perform these mid-year visits. And finally, per the business license ordinance, county officials and staff may inspect the cannabis operations records, books, accounts, financial data, and any and all data relevant to its licensed activities for the purpose of conducting an audit or an examination. And with that, I'll turn the presentation back over to Mr. Malekian.
Thank you, Stephen, for that very thorough and comprehensive explanation of a very complex process. Before we continue, I would like to allow Gina DePinto from the County Executive Office to explain different ways that people can ask questions or make comments, both by phone and directly through Zoom, if that's the platform that you're using. Gina?
Thank you, Barney. Good evening, everyone. I see that we actually already have someone with their hand raised to ask a question. So when we get to the Q&A, Ed, you will be the first one that we call on. And so because I don't know which way you came in through Zoom, I don't see anyone just by phone yet. You should be able to find a raise your hand feature just in case. If your computer does not have a microphone and you wish to speak, you can also keep your computer connection going, but add a phone line at 833-548-0276. If you are using a phone for your audio, to raise your hand, it's *9. To mute or unmute your phone, it is *6. Windows users can also use the Alt+Y key to raise or lower your hand. Mac users can use the Option Y to also raise or lower your hand. And lastly, I guess we've got the Q&A where you can type a question or a comment. All comments will be received and added to our record, but we will hold Q&A and comments to the end of the presentation. And with that, Barney, I'll hand it back to you to continue.
Thanks, Gina. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Catherine Lair from the Planning and Development Department, who will explain the permitting process and walk you through how to use our website to analyze various parcels. Catherine?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Catherine Lair. I'm a supervising planner in the cannabis section of the county's Planning and Development Department. As Mr. E noted earlier, any future cannabis storefront retail businesses will need to obtain a land use entitlement through the Planning and Development Department. The next few slides will provide an overview of the permit process for potential cannabis retail businesses, where these retail businesses can potentially be located, and what happens after an applicant obtains a permit through the planning department. The county code defines cannabis storefront retail as the retail sale and delivery of cannabis or cannabis products to customers and is referred to as a storefront retailer. A storefront retailer is required to operate from a licensed premise, which is the physical location from which all these activities are conducted. A retailer's premise may be closed to the public, and deliveries may also be conducted out of these operations. Land use permitting is regulated by 3 separate ordinances for the inland, coastal, and Montecito areas of the county. Any future cannabis retailer applications will be analyzed and processed through one of these ordinances. Storefront cannabis retail businesses located in the inland area are allowed in most commercial zone districts, as well as some manufacturing zone districts, with the approval of a land use permit. Similarly, in certain mixed-use zone district areas, cannabis storefront retailers can be allowed with a conditional use permit. I'll provide an overview of the land use and conditional use permit processes in the next slide. Storefront retail projects located in the coastal zone areas of the county require a coastal development permit and are only allowed in commercial zone districts. Finally, the Montecito Land Use and Development Code does not allow for cannabis storefront retailers in the Montecito area. Although cannabis storefront retailers can be permitted in all of the aforementioned zone districts, there are other locational criteria that may limit the location of a retail business. For example, storefront retailers may not be located within 750 feet from schools providing instruction in kindergarten or any grade 1 through 12, daycare centers, or youth centers. I'll provide a more detailed overview of the Los Alamos community plan area and highlight the zone districts that could potentially allow for retail businesses in future slides. As previously mentioned, any future cannabis retail business will need to obtain a land use, coastal development, or conditional use permit with the planning department. I'll now provide an overview of the land use and coastal development permit processes. An applicant is first required to meet the applicable requirements under the business license review process, after which they can submit for a land use application to planning and development. Staff then reviews the project for conformity with all applicable zone district requirements, such as setbacks and parking, and also for cannabis-specific development standards. Certain applications will need to be reviewed by other county agencies, such as the fire department, environmental health services, and even potentially some external agencies like Caltrans. Once an application is deemed complete and all of the analysis is completed, the project is then ready for a decision, and the planning department will notify all property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the subject property, as well as interested parties. This mailed notice also includes information on how to appeal a decision. Once the planning department makes a decision on a project, which can either be approval or denial of an application, there is a 10 calendar day appeal period for applicants and or members of the public to appeal the department's decision. For projects that require a land use or coastal development permit, the department's general goal is to make a decision within 3 to 6 months. The permit process for a conditional use permit is similar to what I just went over, except a conditional use permit requires a public hearing, and the project must also meet additional findings that are focused on ensuring neighborhood compatibility of all of the proposed uses. As detailed in the prior slide, staff will review applications for conformance with all applicable zone district requirements and cannabis development standards. Staff will also obtain all required clearances as applicable. When projects that require a conditional use permit are ready for a hearing, staff will send notices to all property owners and residences within 1,000 feet of the subject property, as well as interested parties. Notices for conditional use permits will include the date of the public hearing and also include information on how an applicant or a member of the public can file an appeal. For projects that require a conditional use permit, the department's general goal for making a decision on the project is 6 to 9 months. If the planning department approves a project, applicants still must complete several post-approval requirements. For example, applicants will still need to comply with all conditions of approval that are placed on the project from planning as well as other county departments, and applicants must also obtain any grading or building permits as needed. Additionally, the approved cannabis storefront retailers will still need to obtain a county business license from the county executive office, as Mr. Yee outlined earlier in his presentation. So now we'll take a quick look at the Los Alamos community plan area. So this map identifies potential sites where retailers can be located in Los Alamos. The green area of the map are zone districts that would allow for cannabis storefront retailers. These include commercial, C1 and C2, light manufacturing, and mixed use zone districts I described earlier in the presentation. So it's really important to note that these areas only show the zone districts where future cannabis storefront retailers could potentially be located. However, as previously described, any future storefront retailers would need to go through the appropriate county permit processes before they were allowed to operate. So on this map, there's an area outlined in blue, and that's a sensitive receptor, meaning school, daycare, or youth center, and it's surrounded by a red buffer. That red buffer is 750 feet, and that buffer extends from the property parcel boundary. These buffer areas shown in red are areas where no storefront retailer can be operating from. For example, even though there is a green zone in this area that could potentially allow this business because of the zoning, because of this red buffer area, they would not be able to obtain permits or operate in this area. So finally, as we start to wrap up here, I wanted to note that some additional information and mapping resources can be found at the county's cannabis webpage located at cannabis.countyofsb.org. I think a lot of you are already familiar with this website and you've used it to get to our Zoom meeting tonight. So specifically, we're going to point you in the direction of our interactive cannabis mapping program, where you can explore a more interactive version of the maps described here and shown on your screen. So while I share my screen here, the website that I had mentioned is cannabis.countyofsb.org. And I've already gone ahead and clicked on that red banner for tonight's community engagement meeting. And this is the page that we're brought to. If you scroll down under helpful links, there's a link to our interactive map. The link right next to it is a tip sheet on how to navigate the permitting map if you have any questions. So clicking on our interactive permitting map link, it will bring you to our interactive mapping program. On the top right here, there's a symbol and it's labeled as bookmarks. For these community meetings, we've bookmarked each of the 6 community plans that Mr. Yee had mentioned. So for tonight's meeting, we're going to click on Los Alamos. That'll direct us to the Los Alamos community plan area. In addition, we also have a variety of layers that folks can turn on to get a better idea of what's displayed. So for tonight's presentation, we have the 750-foot buffer, the parcels and zones allowing cannabis storefront retail, sensitive receptors, and then down here, I also included the zoning type. So zooming into the Los Alamos area, I'm going to select this parcel here. Clicking on this parcel brings up this little box which provides the APN, the site address, and clicking through this arrow, it also identifies the type of zoning. So the zoning for this parcel is mixed use, which means that if anybody were to submit a permit to operate a cannabis retail storefront business from this location, it would require a conditional use permit. Going back here, we also have a link for Google Maps. Clicking on this, it'll link to the Google Maps page and provide a satellite overview of what we're looking at. In addition to this, and as outlined in the tip sheet, there's a little Google person here that we can do a drag and drop to get a better view of what is on the ground. The parcel that I clicked on happens to be a post office location. And going through, I think a lot of us are familiar with how to use it, but if not, we can use this, our cursor, to move forward and take kind of a look at the downtown area. So this is how you use our interactive map, and it's a really useful resource that we hope you guys will utilize, get a better idea of potential zone districts and areas that these storefront retailers can operate out of. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Mr. Malekian.
Thank you, Catherine. As always, that's fascinating to me to watch that ability to look at individual parcels and streets. And with that, it's time really to get your questions and comments, which is really the core purpose of tonight's meeting. I would like to just remind everybody that this is not a night when we are going to select a site or designate a vendor. We'd like to hear from you about your thoughts about the placement of retail cannabis in the Los Alamos community plan area, concerns that you have about traffic or parking, questions that you may have about the process and next steps. And if you are going to make comments, we'd actually ask that you limit it to 2 to 3 minutes, just in the interest of everyone's time. And with that, Gina, I'll turn it over to you. I don't see anybody in the Q&A pipeline, so I don't know if you have anybody or not.
We do. So Sienna is the first hand up. Ed, you had raised or lowered your hand. So if you changed your mind, just raise it again. So Sienna, I am unmuting, giving you the opportunity. Your mic is open. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and all the work that you're doing. My question is there any restriction on a residential buffer around a property?
I'm not sure. Can you clarify the question a little bit?
Yes, I can. So if we're looking at potential property, but we click on the filter that shows the residential area, and it says, I think it was 200 feet. Is that a property that would not be allowed for cannabis retail if it's within a 200-foot buffer of a residence? Or are there no restrictions around residents?
Catherine, I'm going to look to you. I'm not sure that I'm still getting the question.
Sure. So we do have that layer that identifies a buffer showing residents within 200 feet. That
Yes.
buffer is for informational purposes for folks using this map, so they can kind of easily identify where there's residential locations, since this map is generally focused on cannabis applications and areas zoned for cannabis. So it's to give a little more depth and context to the locations and surrounding area.
Okay, so if there is a location that, and we did put on that filter, we can still apply for a location even though there is a residence within the 200 feet.
That's correct.
Okay, great. I just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next up, we have, is it Seamus?
Go ahead.
Seamus, you should be getting a cue to unmute. There
Okay.
you go. You're open. Your mic is open.
All right. Thanks for having us, guys. Thanks for hosting this today. I did have one quick question. I noticed in there that if applicant receives a license and they sell 10% of their company, they need to receive or apply for a new business license. Would they need to shut down the current operating business during that time?
I think the short answer to that is no. They do have to go through the business licensing process, but I don't know if we've addressed that particular nuance. But Stephen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I don't think that you would have to shut down while you were doing that if it was just that minor of a change in ownership. You're on mute.
First of all, thank you, Seamus. I believe Mr. Malekian is correct. And please keep in mind too, for the retail storefront process, at the end of this selection process, based on the various scoring and the resulting rankings per business license, I beg your pardon, per community plan area, we will be establishing a list, a sort of an eligibility list based on the final scores and ranking. So if if one entity were to, let's just say they were to close up shop altogether, we would actually refer to the list and look to see who's next up on the list. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Perfect. I appreciate your help. Thank you, guys.
Sure.
Thank you. So we have, excuse me, no other hands raised and nothing in the written Q&A.
Well, folks, thank you. And as you can see, it's interesting. Every one of these meetings, there are a lot of technical nuances to this that we will be continuing to work through. I would, as you think about this meeting or things that you heard, if you have questions, I would invite you to submit them. I think the next slide is going to show you various ways that you can contact us, and we'll get back to you. Your questions and comments will be absorbed into the final presentation when we come to the board. The board meeting on August 18th is to present a very broad overview of these community plan area meetings and to obtain approval for the two score sheets that we mentioned earlier, the business license application score sheet and the neighborhood compatibility score sheet. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for taking the time. You can see our contact information in front of you there. You can also get to us through cannabis.countyofsb.org. And with that, I want to wish you a good evening. Be safe, and we'll talk soon. Good night.